Yeah.
Pretty good batteries.
Yeah, no worries.
I typically just run once a week.
Yeah, that's what I did today.
Because I have my work laptop, and I've had the working, this email pulled up the whole time. I have it on separate tabs and stuff. So, saying this is like.
Email, change the word.
Yeah. Because I'll never stop looking. That's the reason why I didn't.
Good evening. I'd like to call the special called budget work session to order. Ms. Johnson, will you please read the roll?
Mrs. Kirby,
Here.
Mr. Hill,
Here.
Mr. Daniels,
Here.
Mrs. Hairston,
Here.
Mr. Holbrook,
Here.
Dr. Mealy,
Here.
excuse me, Mr. Nels.
Here.
Madam Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you, ma'am. Do I have a motion to allow a board member to participate remotely?
So moved.
I have a motion by Ms. Harrison. Do I have a second? Second by Mr. Daniels. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
Madam Chairman, I move that we approve the agenda for March the 17th, 2022.
Thank you, Ms. Harrison. Do I have a second?
A second.
Second by Mr.
Second.
Nims. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Item 2.01, discussion of the fiscal year 2023 budget. Mr. Hagler.
Yes, I recommend the budget binder that we passed out at the last school board meeting, kind of be the guiding document that we're looking at tonight for discussion. There have been, I appreciate there have been some phone calls and some questions that we've been able to answer over this past week. I think the focus for the school board, really looking at page 15 and maybe even 16, where we kind of detail what are the highlights in the budget, and then also on the bottom of page 15, detailing what are the changes year over year. And then unfunded needs on 16 would probably be the best place to start to see if there's any additional questions or questions that need to be stated tonight. And staff is here to answer those or can respond to any of those.
Any questions for Mr. Hagler?
I do.
Okay.
So Mr. Hagler, page 17, if I'm reading that correctly, we are recommending a 5.8 increase year over year.
To the operating budget only.
Okay.
Yeah, once we get to page 17, there are several different, it's the operating fund that we focus on there. Yes, sir.
So can you help me on the overall, what is the bottom line number that we are saying increase by?
All funds included?
Yeah.
If we turn to page 14. It doesn't break it out by fund there, but it breaks that, on that page, it breaks about the funding source.
Okay.
So it's the 14,303,000.
Okay, so 14 million year over year.
Yeah, the majority of that would be in the CIP fund for HVAC related things from CARES Act that we're gonna be working on. So that would be temporary, that's one-time funding. So you're seeing a very large increase there, $8 to $10 million. That will come in, we'll do all those projects, and then that'll come off. So, that's the biggest part of that. But if you look at the operating, that is reoccurring, that is not for, there is some CARES Act funding in there, about 2 million. So that is part of the change in the operating, but the vast majority of that big number is, the CARES Act for the HVAC projects.
Any more questions?
Mr. Hagler, Madam Chairman.
Yes, Dr. Mealy?
Mr. Hagler, so you said it was 5.8 million, but 2 million of that is, I just want to make sure I have that correct, is for CARES money that, again, will eventually go away.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay,
In the budget, for the operating fund, there's an increase, of federal money. There's some decreases, but, about $2 million is budgeted into next year for CARES Act, really for learning loss teachers and, to fill those positions. There may be some other things we might have to do for cleaning and custodial, but mostly for teachers is what that's gonna be spent on.
okay, and Mr. Hagler, are you at some time, I don't know if this is the right time or not, going to specifically talk, I think our staff is waiting to hear about raises, or will you be addressing that?
Yes, I think in
I'm gonna ask a question.
yes, I'll defer to Dr. Calvert on that. I think we stated a little bit about that, but she's ready to add a little bit more detail. And that's the biggest part. It's really the only add in the budget for the operating is really all focused on salaries, not really many program changes. There's technical adjustments in there, but the new additional money in the ask is really for salaries. So I'll defer to Dr. Calvert and she can answer some, say a little bit about that and or can ask questions on that.
So,
Madam Chairman, is it okay for me to ask that question at this time?
well, let's let Dr. Calvert present and then see what questions you have
Okay,
to follow
thank
up
you.
with. Thank you.
Thank you.
So for teachers, the raise is between 4 and 12%. The majority, about 40% of them will receive between 4 and 4.5%. And that is the ones that are really on the scale between 1 and 11 years, where we didn't see the significant gaps. And then 60% of them, or 455 teachers, will receive greater than 4.5%. So on average, it's about 7% overall. Some of them, we did a very thorough job of going in and looking at their total year's experience, restoring all the steps from when they'd been frozen, even looking back for some of them on what they came coming into Bedford to make sure they were correct. On the support side of things, a lot of things in the salary study dealt with reclassification. So everyone was reclassified, brought to minimum on that new classification and given 4%. So overall, for everyone, it's more of a 7% on average. But know that the range is from 4 to 12.
Mrs. Curry, can I add to that comment?
Yes.
As we stated the last time we were with you, our number one priority was funding the compensation step. So we're competitive in years 1 to 11. In the early years of the teachers' careers, we do well in comparison, but we don't for our most experienced teachers, which is why you see the differentiation in compensation, because those experienced teachers did not receive COLAs and step adjustments for many years. So that's what we call restoration steps, is to go back and compensate them for what they would have earned if we would have had the funding in those years. So on average, 60% of our teachers are gonna see on average, 7% increase. Some of them are gonna see 8, 9, 10, 11, 12% increase. Everyone is going to see at least a 4.5% increase. So that's the highlight of this budget. If you have any further questions about that, we can go into even more detail, but we wanted to make sure that our teachers in particular are aware that this administration and this proposed budget is prioritizing compensating our most experienced teachers for compensation we didn't have to provide for them during the years of recession.
So it completely fixes the teacher scale, 100%.
Great news. Dr. Mealy, you had a question?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. So, Dr. Calvert, again, I asked this on behalf of our staff. Teachers are going to be receiving on average a 7% raise. And that includes people who did not get their 1.5% to 2% step when they were frozen. correct?
Yes, the steps are restored. They should be able to say, I'm a 20-year experienced teacher. I've been teaching for 20 years. They should be able to see themselves on step 20.
Okay. Now, because it's just natural human nature, Dr. Calvert, I may find myself in a school, working next to a person that I thought perhaps we made the same salary. And because I personally do understand the difficulty in switching and, from one pay scale to another and restoring those steps, will teachers have, any staff member, I should say, have access to you and perhaps Mr. Hagler personally if they have a question so that, if I'm a teacher, you could sit down with me and say, well, Dr. Miller, let me show you how we arrived at the percentage that you received.
Yes, we would be happy to do that. The HR department has went into detail into some of the teachers back into, historic records to figure out how many years' experience, and we would be happy to answer any phone call or review that with them.
Okay, and all they need to do is call somebody, is that correct?
Yes, Dr. Mealy.
Let me add to that,
Who do they call?
They can call HR and then one of us will handle the phone call from there.
Okay.
I'd like to also add, when we actually have a final budget and generate contracts, we actually say, here's your salary, if there's any additional stipends. And also, we will list what step or how many years of service they have. So when they get that document, if they go, wait a minute, that's off, they would come to HR, we'd do the research, if it needed to be adjusted, we'd redo a new contract. And so this really completes the restoration steps, gets everybody, all the teachers back on. If this is the amount of years you have, this is the step you're on. It's really years is the step, and it gets it back to that, where it's been a long time and trying to fix all that up.
Now, that is very true for teachers.
For teachers.
Support staff has been reclassified and they're in salary bands. So it is different for support staff. You've been reclassified, you've been brought to minimum, and you're given at least 4%. So teachers are 100% restored.
So Randy, Leanne, I'm sorry, Dr. Moody, can I just ask a clarification from staff on this as well? Because I understand the essence of your question. I'm a teacher. If this budget is approved, what am I gonna make next year? What kind of raise am I looking at? So these are in the budget book. Am I referring to the right page, Randy?
Yes, sir.
31 and 32?
Any teacher could go to the budget book that the board has in front of them tonight. It's both on board docs and on our website under the finance page, budget 2022-23. Go back and look if you're a 200, 210 teacher, what year of teaching are you going into next year? Look there, and that's what would be on your contract next year.
Page 31 and 32.
Right, for
It's
teachers.
available through our website. So I would recommend, Dr. Mealy, you're asking the question, but any of our board members, if you're contacted by a teacher saying, budget sounds good, what am I gonna make? It's in the document. They can find that, they know the number of years they've taught, they can find themselves in the table. If, once contracts are issued, if that doesn't seem to jive with their understanding of what their years of compensation should be, then they should follow up with Human Resources. But they can answer the question for themselves in the proposed budget. If that makes sense.
Dr. Mealy, I actually had Ms. Hairston before you.
Okay, thank you, sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Really, I'm gonna piggyback off of Dr. Mealy's question to Randy, Mr. Hagler. In terms of the teachers, I think this is great that the teachers are gonna have an opportunity to chat with you guys whenever if they're in question regarding their salaries and increase and all. I'm wondering if that opportunity will also be extended to our paraprofessionals, our support staff, if they have questions regarding their raise and their income as well. Will they also be afforded that same right?
I would be happy to answer anyone's questions.
All right, and they would just simply need to call, is that
Yes.
correct? Okay.
I would state that once the board has an adopted budget, it's still preliminary until we know the final money from the state and the county. HR and myself and our teams will do as much as we can to communicate this out to our staff. Instead of waiting for them to come to us, we want to get out and say, this is what we did. And then say, if you have individual questions, we'll answer that. We want to communicate that out. We haven't done that yet because the board hasn't taken action on anything, but once the board takes action on something, we're gonna do all we can to communicate that out. We'll try to do some meetings, and it's hard to do meetings with bus drivers, but if it's virtual or going out or doing it by zone, we'll try to do that thing so we can communicate, get question and answers back, and dialogue with our staff.
I think that's important for all of our staff, that we afford them that opportunity to ask the questions and get the clarity that they need.
Yes, ma'am.
Did you have any more questions, Ms. Harrison? Dr. Mealy?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mr. Hagler and Dr. Calvert, just as a reference, if I am a teacher with, I don't know, 15 years experience, did I transfer over to the new salary scale at the same 15 years?
If you're a teacher, yes. Well, you
Well-
would have
well-
transferred,
Let me put, if you look back at our old salary scales, we had steps and we had years of service next to it. If you had 15 years currently, it's not in front of me, you might have been on step 12 right now, not 15. So if you had 15 years experience right now, you'll be going into your 16th year next year.
Yes.
You will be on step 16.
Right.
So if you think about it, you were on 12 because we froze those. If you gave one step, you would go to 13. You're still behind because of frozen. We're taking you from 12 to where you should be on 16. That's why you're seeing some people that have the most experience having higher percentage of increase in salary. We're getting you to where you should be. Steps 1 through 10 and 11, they're where they should be. A 10-year teacher is on 10 right now. The 15 or the 17-year teacher are not where they should be, and we're trying to fix that in what we're implementing here.
and you notice on page 31 and 32, it no longer says step, it says years on the teacher scales.
Thank you.
Madam Chair. Far as transportation staff, custodial and nutrition staff, is there a average range for them as well? Far as is there a 4 to 8% range that they would be getting, or is it just a flat 4%?
I think when we said 4 to 12, that was everyone.
Is that? Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
And so when you get to support outside of teachers, there's still that kind of range for them.
Okay.
Everybody get at least 4. But for support staff, there's 2 things that somebody might get more. One is there were several groups that were classification changes and that they were under market. And so they might get closer to 10% because when we compare to other districts and we said, where do some of these staff compare? They were way below market, so we're adjusting that.
So we're
So
bringing all
that
the
group would see
yeah.
more. And then in our proposal is that if there were certain people frozen in nutrition and in custodial staff that were frozen, and there's a few bus drivers that might have been frozen, some of those will get their steps restored too, just those groups,
Just those 3
those
groups.
3. We'd like to do more. It's an unfunded needs, but so those would get more than the 4. Some might get 5, 6, 7, depends on how many steps we owe. That's why it's truly a
It's a
range
large
for
range.
teachers and
Range.
for support staff.
Ms. Harrison?
Yes, Mr. Hagler, our employees that are car drivers, they drive for our special needs children.
Yes, ma'am.
Where do they fit into these raises?
I think what we're looking at this time, those car drivers,
Go ahead.
I think we've talked with transportation, they do quite a bit of driving for us. Historically, we have not contracted with car drivers. It's been, if you drive that day, we pay an hourly rate. We're gonna move some of those to contracted. It's just, they're driving every day, it's routine, and we can do that. But I would say in this budget, when we do a 4%, and I say all employees, that's substitutes that we don't contract, that's remediation rates we pay in the afternoon for teachers to do remediation. That's extracurricular
hourly.
activities, all employees that are paid all hourly rates will go up by 4%.
Now, If I may just
Yeah, go ahead.
follow up, please. So with the car drivers, in terms of identifying those that you're gonna put on a contract, how are you going to make that determination? Are we looking at the number of years that they have
It was the
driven?
number, if I remember correct, and Pat Smith is probably the person that needs to truly answer this question, but it was the amount that they were driving, and it was her drivers that were 100%.
Okay, so the distance in which they're driving?
The amount of hours in the day, cause there's 60% drivers, 80% drivers, 100% drivers, and she was looking, if I remember right, Randy, it was like 20-some drivers she was moving
Yep.
to contract about half the car drivers, something like that. And they were the drivers that were driving the greater portion of the day.
Okay, I would really like very much to have some more definitive numbers there and in terms of how many and how she has derived.
We'll ask her to work with Dr. Dewis and we'll get
Okay,
some out to the board. The other factor with car drivers, the reason we haven't done it in the past, but it's become, you can see the amount that we have. There's days that if the student's not going to school, they don't drive. So my recommendation to Pat in guiding this is that we don't wanna do them all because there are gonna be some down days. And then you can shift around and we're not paying people not to come in. So some will be under contract, some will not. If they don't drive, they won't get paid, and we can shift around and meet the needs as she has the needs and move people into place.
okay.
So we're not doing them all, but we're doing quite a bit.
Well,
But we'll get some
We're
more
doing
details.
more than we,
And we're headed in a really good direction, that's very positive, so thank you.
Any more questions, Ms. Harrison? Mr. Daniels?
Just, real quick, with those, special needs car drivers, they're driving their own cars? No, they drive,
We do, Bedford County, Dr. Dewis, correct me if I'm wrong, we do maintain a white fleet of cars that some of the, they use. We used to have more, but we've kind of shrunk our fleet, so most staff, if they're itinerant and doing, are using their own cars and we reimburse. But for special ed, I believe, how about I'm not speaking, I think most of those are our cars that we maintain
okay.
in use. And so, no, they're not.
So then gas is all taken care of for them, they're not coming out?
Yeah, so they're using our tanks and filling up with our fuel that we're buying, and the cars are maintained by our mechanics down
Okay.
at the bus shop.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions? Wow. Okay. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda as presented? I mean, not the agenda, the budget is presented.
Madam Chairman, I move that we make a motion to accept the budget proposal as presented.
Yeah, I have a motion by Dr. Mealy. Do I have a second?
Second?
Second by Ms. Harrison. Mr. Daniels, any discussion?
Yeah, I thought there was gonna be more presentation, so I had other questions, I was trying to find a spot to ask them, so I guess, I don't know if I'm allowed to ask them now.
Sure. We have a motion and a second. We'll keep that in mind and we'll.
Okay. Mr. Hagler, can you guide us through the staffing standards that we have at the schools for the number of positions assigned for each school?
Yes, sir.
Or needed, I should say.
In the appendix, and just to restate to the board,
Yes.
I think I stated at the board meeting the other night, a lot of the numbers in the budget are driven by some of the things that are in the appendix. So this is a preliminary budget, but you're adopting a budget tonight that we would execute if all the funding came in exactly like we're expecting. There's still General Assembly work, there's still Board of Supervisor work. But that includes, the health insurance rates, those factor in, and I've gotta do that. It includes the staffing standards, Mark Blankenship's numbers on enrollment and all of that comes in. So in the appendix, staffing standards, it begins on page 41. I take these standards that were developed by HR and previous staff years ago, and we plug in Mr. Blankenship's numbers that he's projecting by school, and that calculates the staff for the school. So these, I would say a staffing model, somebody asked me before, does it save money or cost money? It's an allocation model. It doesn't save or cost. You change it, it redirects the resources fairly across the board based upon the schools and these staffing standards. So back there, we plug in Mr. Blankenship's numbers, we say what the school gets, and then in each year, the ADM or the average daily membership changes. Either the school's gonna lose some staff, might gain, And so in my technical adjustments, that there's actually savings. We've gone down a little bit in enrollment, so that's plugged in. However, as we get into the summer, if more kids show up, that school gets the staff and we adjust on the fly. So you go, well, that kind of is a problem with your budget because you're adding expenditures, but I'm gonna get more state money. So we're watching this throughout July and August, and principals are watching it, so we adjust on the fly to these staffing models, and we allot out more staff if more kids show up. And so what's not in the staffing standards is really special education. That is caseload. Kelly Jennings, Director of Special Education, oversees that and allocates out. With special education, if there's kids' needs out there, we take care of it. It's not like, oh no, it's not it. We just take care of that, and we need to take care of those kids. And so she projects the best she can with the staff and what the caseload is, but new kids come in and we have to add staff. We just have to do that as we go.
Pot of money, correct? It's a different pot of money.
Some of it's federal, some of it's state, a lot of it's local. But those are things we just need to do, and that's where I brief the staff. Like, when I come with my quarterly updates, if we're having to add staff, I'll show that we've had to do that and where there's exposure in the budget as we're going through it. So in the staffing standards, we're really looking at principal, assistant principal, guidance counselors, librarians, aides, teachers, and allocating those out. And so the HR staff, along with the instructional staff, are working with principals now saying, this is where we see you next year. Talk back to us, do you see any problems? And kind of addressing those problems, especially if mixed classes in elementary or something that's gonna be a problem. They're still working through that. That's where the CARES Act money will help us next year. Long term, that's not there, but that's where we could say, oh, there's a need here. We can tap into that $2 million and assign somebody. I don't know if I'm getting to your question, but the staffing model is an allocation methodology to say we're allocating fairly across the division.
Okay.
And Mr. Downs, if I can add on to Mr. Hagler's explanation. These staffing standards are Bedford County staffing standards, not the state standards. And you can just Google Virginia SOQ staffing standards. You know, as a for instance, the state says if an elementary school is smaller than 400 students, you need a part-time principal. We have a full-time principal in all our buildings. The state says if you're in a kindergarten classroom, you could have up to 29 kids. The state says you could have 30 in grades 1 through 3 and 35 in grades 4 through 6, and no maximum in grades 7 through 12. So when the state allocates funding to Bedford and everywhere else, it's based on the SOQs. So they know our they know our enrollment size. There's a mathematical calculation that occurs, and that determines that's part of the calculation. But we far exceed that because we expect more. So you'll see, we ask you when you adopt the budget to adopt the staffing standards.
Well, I would think that it would be very stressful on the teachers and staff and on all the students if you have class sizes that were that big.
Sure.
That was the first question I had.
Just to piggyback on that, so when we talk about giving salary increases, the state will say, we're gonna fund only our portion for the SOQ. So that means the LCI comes in, so they're gonna say, we're gonna give you 60 cents on the dollar for what it costs to give to your standards of quality. We have to come up with the other 40, but for anybody above the standards of quality, we're 100% local having to fund that, so.
A couple more. For those ESSER 3 positions that are in on page 48, are those permanent or are they temporary?
They will all be, I'll say it this way. Lacking funding to continue any of them, they're all temporary. So when we get to out-year budgets, if anything that's in there, for instance, we want to maintain more teachers. Well, we got to change the staffing standards, and it becomes part of the staffing standards to maintain that level. It won't be done with federal CARES Act money. So they are there, once the money's gone, this board would have to take action to increase the level of the teachers, or I think there's only two other positions. One is coordinating all this money coming in for the ESSER funds. That would go away unless there was some other position and stuff. And there's a special ed supervisor in there also. So if that was critical to maintain that, we would have to identify another funding source, not the CARES Act. So not to say that they're they're gonna go, wait, the board could take action to say we wanna increase how many teachers we have, and then they would stay, but not with CARES Act funding.
This funding is only for 1 year, correct?
No, there's enough money for, I'm using the word learning loss, acceleration, it's for the students and teachers. We have till 24 to spend it, so there's 2 million in this year, in the 22-23 budget, but I still have another 2 million I can add to the operating budget for 23-24. If need be, or help, yeah.
Sorry, I don't wanna build off of that though. So I thought I understood you say 10 positions for next year and 5 positions for the following year based on funding?
There's 2 million there for the HR staff, if need be, to spend it, it's built into the budget. It would be my guidance that maybe we don't spend it all, but it's there if we need it for the students. If we spend it all, it'll be about 20 teachers. If we do it again the following year, it'll be 20 teachers. And then when you get to the following year, it's all gone. So you have to eliminate 20 teacher position that somebody's been used to for the last 3 or 4 years. HR is working with the principals on where to place these staff and where there's needs as the year goes along. So what's in the budget is up to 20 positions, but they might not use all those.
But they
Because
are teaching positions, correct? Teachers in the classroom.
I'll defer to Dr. Calver on that. I believe so.
So far.
Yep.
I
Class
think
size,
everything we've done is teachers.
class size reduction.
We haven't had to use
Library.
any for,
Class
we've had to
size.
use for library, art, music. We've tried to even those out between the schools, so
There's
all
been a
schools have the
PE,
same.
yeah.
Even out to make sure every school has art, every school has PE, the same, like percentages based on their students. So that's, right now, we've only really worked with the elementary principals. We haven't gotten to the middle and high schools yet. So Dr. Calvert and I are like
Yeah, we
kind of
haven't
doling
made
out
any-
positions and trying to be very careful with that so that we can back off a little bit at a time.
So they have to go through the FTEs and go through their staffing standard to do their proposed schedule. And then if there's a problem, like I would have to combine second and third graders, or, you know, the sharing of this librarian is not gonna work, that type of thing between 2 schools, then they would meet with us. And then we would weigh out whether that was a true concern, and then we would allot based on that, once they met with us. We've met with some elementary teachers, not all. I don't know if the rest of them have the concerns, the ones we met with already have met with us. The secondary is in the middle of starting the master schedule and card next, so I don't think they're at a point where they're prepared to discuss that with us yet, but we're being pretty stingy with what we hand out. And it's, you know what I mean, we're keeping it because we wanna keep it lower than what we predicted. Does that answer your question?
I'll come back. I don't wanna take away from Mr. Daniels.
I only have one more, and then it's all yours. All the expenditures that we make, are they available online pretty easily for the public to be able to see what comes in, what's going out?
Yes, sir. We, I believe we're very transparent. Any check to any vendor is in the consent agenda for the board members.
Okay.
So you can see every check that we cut. In addition, there are staff that use purchase cards. We post that entire statement. You see every charge going through that. So every transaction outgoing is on our consent agenda. The timing of when we get those, it might be the next board meeting when we get the statement. So if the board meeting was on the 4th of the month, the credit card statement will be on the next one.
Sure.
So we post all that online. So any community member can look at anything that we're paying.
So super transparent.
Yes, sir.
Okay. That's it.
Mr. Gill?
So in this budget, are we adding any positions?
Permanent positions?
Are we adding any positions?
The only adjustments in the budget for positions was because of enrollment changes and the staffing standards kicking in on that. So I would say no, unless we give out some staff using CARES Act money.
Those 20 positions that are in there that we have the
Yeah.
ability to give out. If you're not
So-
counting those, the answer would be no.
The two other positions we're using CARES Act money were in the current year budget. Those positions are in existence, so those aren't adds, but they would be carrying forward,
They're
until.
not permanent positions is what you're saying.
There is a change in staffing standard on middle school assistant principal from what it was previously,
Thank you.
from what it was last year.
Is that the only change?
So that would give a third assistant principal to Stanton River Middle School and Liberty Middle School.
Yes.
I'm sorry, a second, I was counting
A
three
second,
total, a second
it would
assistant
give Stanton River
principal.
Middle and Liberty Middle a second, and JF already, Forest Middle already has a second.
So those would be two full-time
10
headed
months.
assistant principal
Oh.
positions.
10 months.
10 months means they
Okay.
work just when the kids are there,
Gotcha.
Thank you.
And that was
Thank
Stanton
Karen,
River
she
Middle,
reminded
what others?
Liberty Middle.
Liberty Middle.
And Stanton River.
So the county standards changed, or with the state, what you were saying, as far as staffing requirements?
The county standard changed.
Our standard, we have a higher standard than
Right.
than this.
All right.
Just, can I?
Yeah, sure. Yes, ma'am.
Just out of curiosity, these temporary teachers that we're paying for with the ESSER money, are they aware they're just temporary and they're paid for out of this, or do they think they're gonna be permanent full-time?
We will be able to, I don't have any fear, I don't think you do either, with the turnover that we have because of the national teacher shortage, that we would have any problem with placing them. It's just, we would place them with turnover, you know, when it's time. Placing 10 teachers in a year is not going to be, you know what I mean, difficult.
Situation.
We have that turnover and more.
Yeah, there's a-
So there's,
I know.
I really don't have a concern with that. We're probably seeing, on average, probably 40 to 50 teachers turnover a year, leaving or retiring. So I don't think it gives me any concern that that would be a problem. If we were adding 40 or 50, yes, then we would put into the contract, this is funding for 1 year. It would be harder to recruit and keep somebody that way, so, but that would be a protection you would absolutely want to build in if you didn't think you were gonna have enough that you could place those people.
So we would that year just not do as many letters of intent and contract, because right now we contract people with letters of intent that maybe we don't have spots for to grab them early. So we would just do less of that to build up because we know we'd have extra teachers.
So then when they are hired from this fund into our permanent operating fund, say if they've been on this for 2 years, then they'll come in at step 3 or year 3?
Yeah, it would just be like a normal.
Start over.
Yeah,
even though
the
they're-
same,
They won't
the
do
same,
that.
you're
They're still an
the same,
employee, we would just not hire a new person rather
Yeah.
than, you know,
they would come off of this and replace teacher that's retiring from this school.
yeah.
And they would just come off of this and go over here.
I mean, they may have to move schools, but they wouldn't.
Yeah, so Randy, I think our teachers just receive a contract from Bedford County Public Schools. It doesn't say you're being funded with ESSER.
It doesn't-
No.
So these are
And we wouldn't
positions.
want it to.
No, of course not. So these are teaching positions. We have this many teaching positions and they're paid from a variety of sources. Some of it is CARES funds. But Marcus, back to your question of, that number is gonna need to shrink unless there's an increase in funding and other sources between now and 2 years out. That funding drops off, so we don't wanna hit a cliff and have 20 positions we don't have funding for. So we're being very careful in how we allocate these positions to make sure that we're addressing the needs of the students as they sit today. And then that number will diminish over the next 2 years because the funding goes away. That was where we started in on this conversation with you. You know, we're at 20 positions now that are not people, but positions being funded with federal dollars, and that funding is gonna time out. So we have a plan to not have a cliff and have 20 people that we don't have a place to slide them into when someone else retires.
And that was where I was getting to, so the 20 positions are for teaching positions.
Yes, sir.
And they will be reserved for teaching positions, classroom teaching positions.
There were 2 positions outside of classroom teaching positions that we shared with the board in this school year that continue. One is It's is it coordinator for the
Yeah,
grants?
I mentioned it, grant
You
coordinator
did mention it.
and a special
There's a
specialist.
significant increase in requirements to the school division, to the federal government. So when the grant ends, the position phases out, is our intent.
So Randy, you mentioned specialist, is that right?
Supervisor
Okay, supervisor, okay, for sped.
for sped. And that was, we had a lot of kids coming back in after COVID, helping with that issue and making sure that we transition with that. I would say that position will have to be looked at in the future, and whether it's something that's desperately needed, then staff would recommend it, board would have to pick that up. But that we would bring back to the board as an add to the budget, an FTE add, clearly stated, that we need other funding for, but we're using CARES Act funding for that now.
For both you guys, so those 20 positions, I mean, I guess the assumption is that, I mean, how many teachers retire essentially each year roughly?
Well, if you hold on just a second, I'll find it.
I think we use the number 40 to 50
Um,
between retirement and they relocate
Okay,
in any given year. We hire every year, just from
So
retirement.
far this year, we have 28 retired.
okay, yeah, I was just checking, cause with, you know, the proposed raises that are going, hopefully that helps us keep talent and retain talent, so, and then attract more, so that could help, but it's good to see that with that
Absolutely.
we're not replacing, burning the candle at both ends, I
Yeah,
guess.
and the way I'm stating, I just wanna make sure the board's clear, and the way the HR department, the instructional department's taking it. With this budget, up to 20 with CARES Act money, but we might not do all that.
Sure.
So that means we wouldn't spend it, but I wouldn't get the revenue in either. And then that would have to come back to the board and say, we're gonna change the way the grant's going and we wanna use it here. But that would come back before you to, and we tell you how we're gonna change or amend the grant if we didn't spend all that. But if there was big needs and we still were wanting to do it, maybe we come back and say, we want, and, Mr. Hill, I'll reply to this. For kids, sometimes it's a classroom teacher, it might be, maybe not a classroom teacher, we wanna spend a lot more on remediation after school. I would deem that like, we're spending that money because we want a lot more remediation, trying to get kids caught up and stuff. So it might be for something like that, but it's really for the student. We might not spend it all, but that would come back to the board and say, we didn't spend it all, this is what we plan to do next year. And be very transparent with the board, how much is left, how, this is where we recommend to direct the money, and you could redirect it as you want it.
All right, one more question. Funding for intervention design specialist, where would I see that?
That is gonna be, not in this booklet. It's in the other thing that I attached, it's in our detailed budget, every single line is also on our website. They fall under the area with, where I'm reporting psychologist, under the instructional department. And they would be there. We were funding some intervention design specialists with CARES Act money, those go away next year. There's two, I believe,
Title IV.
with Title IV. That's another grant, I think there's two positions funded with that will continue. And then the other positions are locally funded positions, but they are a separate line item. You'll see a line item for psychologists and you'll see a line item for intervention design specialist. And that is in our detailed budget, and they're listed with the psychologists under the instructional department.
And is that headcount remaining flat, or are you telling me it's decreasing?
It's decreasing because we're not gonna use any CARES Act money to continue that, so we're gonna pull back on that and not use CARES Act money we're using this year for some, but otherwise, no other changes here.
So you're not answering my question.
We're gonna decrease. Yes, sir.
So the funding is good. You're decreasing because the funding for CARES Act is going away for that, or we're not using funds for that.
Are you decreasing the number of people?
We're gonna decrease the number of people because we're not gonna allocate CARES Act money to continue a couple positions that we had as intervention design
So
specialists.
I just I wanted to understand, you're not shifting funding from COVID money over to general budget to fund those positions?
No, sir.
Okay.
There will be no CARES Act COVID money for intervention design specialists for next year. I'm not trying to twist words.
Follow me here.
Yeah.
We currently use COVID money to
Yes.
pay for those positions.
Sure. Yes, sir.
2 of those positions. We are not moving funding over or taking it out of general funding to pay for those 2 positions.
No, those 2 positions are FTE reductions.
Thank you. That was my question. Okay.
And let me just confirm, Ms. Robinson, is it 2 with CARES Act funding, I believe we were funding this year?
That is correct.
Yes, thank you.
And how many does that leave?
How many does that mean?
We have, I'm sorry, I quick count in my head, we have 8,
I think it's 16.
18. 18, sorry.
So of those 18, 2 of those are funded by Title IV?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Question.
Yes, ma'am.
The intervention design specialist, they're not listed on the staffing standards?
Those are, they do not go into the calculation like your membership. That's a needs base and that's assigned by the central office where there's needs for those to be assigned out by Ms. Robinson and her staff. So those are sent out to the schools to help and intervene, but it depends on where the needs are. So it's not like, I think she has some assigned to schools, but we can shift those around based upon need if we had to. But there's some at the larger schools that are there, just there's enough needs there, but some shift around.
The middle and high schools have set intervention design specialists. If those of you who were on the board last year, if you'll remember that chart we have elementary intervention design specialists that work under a school psychologist, and we do deploy them to elementary schools who have needs. But the middle school and high school staff is on campus to do their alternatives to suspension programs. So those, each of those schools are assigned.
Academic support as well.
Yes, and academic support.
Thank you, that's all I have.
That's all you have? Mr. Daniels?
For special education staff, according to that, the study that we saw, they were pretty much, they were fairly underneath, average. Where are we getting them now? Are they still in that 4 to 10%, or is it something different, being that, is it a different bucket for those?
No, they would still be in the 4 to 12%. There was a significant increase for adaptive special ed aides because they were reclassified.
Okay. And that's getting them, we're happy with where they're gonna be?
They're probably gonna see, I would say,
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, thank you.
any paraprofessional and the adaptive would probably see one of the largest increases in their salary next year. They're hard to fill, they're hard to find, they do a tremendous
But in
work.
the
They do great work.
adaptive
And so,
classroom, not
some of those
just,
will see a pretty significant increase.
yes.
Yes, sir.
So that will put them at or above market, basically.
Yes, sir.
They
Great.
were, in the compensation study, they were classified in a different classification from a special ed aide. Previous, we had just all paraprofessionals that were special education in one, and they classified them out.
Gotcha.
Adaptive, and so there's a pretty significant increase for adaptive.
Thank you.
Any more questions?
I do have one question.
Ms. Harrison?
The intervention specialist, and I guess this question is probably for Dr. Calvert. Are we meeting the needs of all of our schools? Or maybe Beth could answer that in terms of with the number of intervention design specialists that we have. Do you feel like we're meeting the needs of our students and that population?
I will candidly say the elementary staff is very busy. Because when an elementary intervention design specialist is deployed, it is to consult with students who are at risk of removal from the school, are having significant disruptive or challenging and incompatible behaviors in the school. So when they are deployed, it is for a commitment to stabilize that case. So they may be working with a case from 4 to 6 weeks and staffing every other week until that progress is seen and they're ready to fade. So there is a queue, as soon as they finish with one case, they begin observations and planning for that next case. And there is a queue of students ready to receive the services and classrooms ready to receive the services. I can say comfortably, the middle and high schools, which are staffed just because we have a higher volume of students and we have a more predictable need. All of my meetings with administrative teams have been very positive about the role that the Intervention Design Specialist Program has provided for students and the alternatives that it has created within the campus and the reduction that they have seen in discipline and just challenging cases. So we are doing our best. We are also looking at the role that the Free Cares Act with Medicaid may play in future billing opportunities for those services. So that if there were any need for expansion, we look at other opportunities for recouping some of those expenses.
I would just say to the board as a whole that as our students are coming back next year, and I'm hearing that, while our needs are being met at the elementary level with some of the challenges and the difficulties that the children are having emotionally, I certainly think that we should consider down the road, certainly adding more intervention specialists at the elementary level. There's a great need there still. We've done a great job, but I still think that we still have a need. If we're having to pull from our middle and our high school support there to meet the needs at the elementary, I think that's a flag for us. So just food for thought as we talk further maybe. Thank you, Ms.
We haven't had to, I wanted to clarify, and we haven't had to pull anyone out of middle or high. But I will say it is coordination, and what we have done to address the needs at the elementary level is, Mrs. Faust and I have also worked to kind of create a triage level. So
Okay.
there are some cases that require 5-day-a-week significant support, some that might have more intermittent, some that are follow-up case management. So we've also, through the course of the year, tried to develop a triaging system so that not every intake goes with a full-time staff commitment, but we can still support those cases. I can say all of our exit survey with administrators and teachers that are part of this process has been very positive, so thank you.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Mr. Hill?
I would just make a comment, before we add any more of those positions, we would need to understand what is the full realm of those positions, and are there opportunities to use outside agencies for what we are attempting to do within the schools. My focus would be on adding more classroom teachers above other positions. Just making a statement.
Okay, any more questions? Dr. Mealy, any questions?
No, thank you, Madam Chairman.
Okay, we have a motion and a second on the floor to approve the budget. I'll call for a vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
I have a motion by Mr. Hill, second by Ms. Hairston. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Meeting is adjourned.